The first quarter of 2026 has passed, and it kicked off the year with an incredibly well-made and surprisingly profound film. You may have heard about it. It's a sci-fi film about a man condemned to a desperate suicide mission that might provide some glimmer of hope for the survival of humanity in the face of a cosmic apocalypse. It is a film that finds strength in its intimacy in spite of the cosmic scale of its premise. A film that asks what gives us hope and drives us to make incredible sacrifices in the face of overwhelming despair. That's right, I'm talking about Iron Lung. What else could I have been referring to? There's no way there could have been two movies with that exact description in the last 3 months. Wait, what's this Project Hail Mary everyone's talking about? Jokes aside, I have to preface this video by acknowledging that I was not smart enough to pick up on the profound similarities between these films on my own. I should have, considering how much I loved each, but it wasn't until I saw this video by Fashionable Crow that I recognized the parallels. And you can be sure I was beating the crap out of myself after realizing I'd let the perfect video idea get swiped from right beneath my nose and had no idea until it was way too late. Fortunately, I'm a shameless copycat, so this was barely an inconvenience. In reality, I debated over whether or not to make this video for a while, and I ultimately decided to forego an in-depth analysis in favor of merely sharing some brief thoughts of my own and referring you to the original video if you want to get deeper into the comparisons. But before I do exactly that, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. And, of course, massive spoilers for both movies ahead. Now without further ado, let's dive into the two best movies of the year so far and what makes them so shockingly similar. To state the obvious, these films are tonally very different. One is largely a funny, feel-good epic adventure that leaves you in awe at the universe and hopeful for humanity, while the other is a claustrophobic thriller set in a horrific world where hope seems all but dead. Thus, it may seem the similarities between these films are superficial, but they actually run surprisingly deep. Both films explore the idea of collectivism and the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, with both Grace and Simon forcibly conscripted on their respective missions with no expectation that they will survive. Each protagonist then spends the movie wrestling between their selfish hope for survival and hope for the good of humanity, ultimately finding a sense of purpose and giving up their own life for a greater good. They may leave you with very different feelings about their ideas, but their thesis statements are actually quite well aligned. So what does each film have to say about this topic? Well, let's start with Project Hail Mary because it's easily the simplest to understand. Ryland Grace is a coward, unwilling to give his life for the greater good, even though he has very little in the way of a personal life to lose. In what might be the darkest moment of the film, we learn in flashback that he was not a willing participant in this mission, but that he was in fact sacrificed by the very collectivism that once seemed so inspiring in its ability to unite the world in the common cause of global salvation. Yet rather than the film suggesting Grace ought to just resign himself to the common good, it shows him change as he develops a friendship with Rocky, to the point that he willingly gives up his life on Earth to save him. Some have criticized the film for making his choices too easy, by emphasizing the fact that he had no friends or family or any notable hopes or dreams back on Earth to give up. But I think that was crucial to the film's point. While it might seem that Grace should have found it easy to sacrifice himself as he had nothing worth living for back on Earth, the film suggests that, on the flip side of that coin, he also had nothing worth dying for. And it is only thanks to his connection to Rocky that he gains the motivation to risk everything and do the impossible. The film demonstrates that while pragmatic utilitarian collectivism can get things done on a large scale, it is ultimately the power of intimate human connection, or just sentient life form connection I guess, that gives individuals the power to make the greatest sacrifices in the face of despair. Iron Lung, meanwhile, is a bit more complicated. However, I think its message might be quite similar. Simon, like Grace, is unwilling to give his own life to a higher good, as he has nothing worth dying for. However, whereas Grace is seen as a simple coward, it seems Simon's selfishness is the result of his disillusionment with causes that justify horrible actions in the name of the greater good. He once belonged to such a collectivist cause himself, but when it used him to commit horrible atrocities, giving him the moniker of the Butcher, he grew embittered toward all such causes and their claims of moral superiority, attempting to reclaim his life, his will, and his individual identity from those who devalue it for the sake of the greater good. Thus, his will to survive feels less like cowardice and more like defiance. The COI is not the only embodiment of dehumanizing collectivism in this story, though. The blood ocean itself seems to be a single giant organism which assimilates all who enter it, ultimately trying to consume Simon himself in the climax. It symbolically represents the very collectivism that turned him into the butcher in the first place and is now trying to sacrifice him, and it urges him to succumb to it, to abandon his individuality and embrace something greater than himself. Yet in spite of this dark framing of collectivism, when his defiant pursuit of his own personal survival proves a futile goal, and it becomes clear his death is inevitable, he begins to repeat the mantra of Ava and the COI. It's bigger than me. This could be read as a surrender to the collectivism he has been resisting this whole movie, but he says this with the same defiance he's maintained the entire film, battling the grotesque cosmic force of assimilation to his dying breath. To me, this reads not as a man's surrender to the cause of those who used him to commit atrocities or those who have condemned him to die, but as a man realizing how hopeless and, frankly, pointless the fight for his own survival is as a cause, and realizing the only way to resist assimilation into the collective and retain any sort of personal meaning in his fleeting life is to find a greater cause of his own worth dying for. When he repeats the mantra of the COI, he is making it his own, and in so doing, he becomes something greater than just a creature fighting for survival or the pawn of a soulless collective, and he dies for something that will live beyond his death. Each of these films asks what inspires true selfless heroism, what gives people purpose beyond their own lives, and both suggest the answer is not simply a utilitarian, dehumanizing collectivism. It is not dogmatic devotion to a cause or loyalty to the interests of a group above all else. These forces can be powerful, but too often in all the wrong ways. But then what does drive people to make the most incredible sacrifices? What gives people hope for something beyond themselves? Well, each film proposes a slightly different answer. Project Hail Mary claims it is the intimacy of human connection. It is friendship, love, or whatever you find least corny, that gives us something worth living for and worth dying for. Iron Lung suggests it is the willing devotion of oneself to an ideal, a higher purpose, one not merely ascribed to you by a group, that gives people the purpose, the meaning, the will to fight on when survival is hopeless and sacrifice everything in the face of despair. And I think both of these thesis statements are equally true and impactful. But which do you find most inspiring? Do you think I missed anything crucial in my analysis? Which of these films is your favorite, and how do they compare? I'm just here to kick off the discussion, so I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, never stay silent.